Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Series 7, the seventh time I'm doing this series on Afterlife and Reincarnation video conference series. Today's session 1, and today is, what day is it? Today is May 17th, 2020. So great to have everybody on. The session today, and those who are watching the recording, we have a big group of people on who are live. We got about 30 people on live right now, so I think we're going to have a really robust Q&A at the end of the session today. Today's session is, the title of today's session, just a reminder, is What Happens When We Die? So we're going to talk about this notion of the afterlife, and we're going to talk about it from an experiential standpoint. What can we look forward to experiencing when we physically die? So we're going to get into that in some detail today in our discussion. Just a quick reminder, the other sessions are the next session in 2 weeks, every other week, and the next session is going to be on getting glimpses of the other side. So NDEs, spiritually transformative experiences, STEs, and out-of-body experiences, OBEs. We'll talk about that. And getting glimpses of the other side in our next session in a couple of weeks. The third session is going to be on reincarnation experiences, and I'll go back. I have 6,000 years of memories, about 20 to 25 lifetimes. So I'll get into that, and I'll tell you about how that unfolded and so forth in some detail, and I'll give you some specifics in terms of some of those memories. And then the fourth session is on the idea of punishment and rewards and punishment. So it's the idea of hell, karma, dharma, and sin. We're going to talk about that in the fourth session. Fifth session, we're going to talk about communicating with the other side, which quite frankly is something that gets woven into all of the sessions to some degree, but I'm really going to focus in on it in much greater detail in the fifth session. And the sixth session is what continues after we die. Is it our soul, spirit, consciousness? How do we define this? And then how does that fit in with the concept of eternity? We're going to talk about eternity in the last session, and soul contracts and pre-birth experience and so forth, a transitional kind of experience like that on the other side before you come back into another lifetime. We'll talk about that in the sixth session. Okay, so that's the overview of the 6 sessions. Just to remind you, you'll get this in the email when I send you the recording out later today, this evening after it uploads to YouTube. You'll see the titles of all 6 sessions there as well, so you don't have to write them all down. Couple of things I want to say just at the outset, just as an introduction to the whole series itself. And before I do that, let me just give a shout out to many of you, or a number of you, are a member of a couple of different groups who have lost children, parents who have lost children. So Helping Parents Heal and Voice of Our Angels, those 2 groups. And I wanted to give a shout out to those groups just because they're so great in terms of supporting parents, not just in the typical, we'll call it, psychotherapeutic kind of way, but in a way that supports the parents who may have belief systems where they're wondering about their kids after their kids have died, which is a terrible experience, of course, predeceasing the parents, but they're wondering about what the experience is like, and maybe even have had experiences, communications from the children after the children have died. So I say this to everybody who's watching this recording, just in case you know people parents who may be in that terrible situation, that horrific situation where one or more of their children have died before them. There are these groups, so you could check them out, Voice of Our Angels and Helping Parents Heal. And you can check them online, and you can find out from me separately if you know anybody I can who would be helped by those groups. I can help. You can just text me or contact me privately afterwards, and I can connect you. Okay, so that's very important for those of you who know anybody who may be able to benefit from that. Um, so some of you don't know me actually, so I should say a few words about who I am, I suppose. Many of you do. Many of you have taken some of my other classes. I teach meditation, so just the very, very quick summary of my background and how it applies to this afterlife and reincarnation series. I've been meditating since I was 19 years old, so I'm a little bit older. I'm a few years older than that now. So I've been meditating for many, many decades, and I've been teaching meditation for 47 years now. Thousands of people around the world and so forth. I call my meditation turning within meditation. Um, in my mid 20s, I spontaneously opened up and started having past life memories. I didn't know what they were at the time. I didn't even know it was past life memories. You'll hear when we get to that session 3. I'll give you the whole story about how that unfolded and what my uh, self discovery and self evaluation, quite frankly, self assessment was when I was going through those experiences. In the mid 1980s, I spontaneously opened up and started experiencing and communicating with the other side uh, seamlessly. It just was very spontaneous in that way, and it just continued to present. So all of that, the reincarnation memories, the communication with the other side, the experience now with the other side for me is very, very normal. And so it's a it's not a an experience that wows me anymore like it did initially. It was a wow experience initially. It was like, what the heck is going on? That was my experience initially, but since it's been going on for 40 something years now, it's very normal. It's very natural. And so what I do, a big part of what I do in my intention in my work, especially with this 6-part series that we're doing together here over the next 12 weeks, is to demystify the mystical, because these experiences, understandably, like I've been there in the beginning days, it was like, what? Are very, seem very far out at first, but after a while you start to settle into them and they become very normal, natural experiences. And so there's a normalcy you'll hear that I encourage explicitly in terms of my languaging and my attitude towards all of these things, is really to demystify these what's typically held out as very mystical experiences. I am not a proponent of those speakers out there who continue to make them mystical even after they've had the experiences themselves. Great. So just that's a quick overview in terms of my background, etc. Um, Also, I just want to make note that we have a worldwide audience here. So we have people from Hawaii, Canada, America, of course, and in the Netherlands, in Europe. So we have a pretty worldwide audience in this particular series right now, and those people are who are live on the call even right now. Another quick kind of 100,000-foot comment in terms of my approach to discussing afterlife and reincarnation experiences and so forth in this series. Your beliefs don't matter. What your belief is, you may not believe everything that I'm saying in these sessions. It does not matter. I am a proponent of critical, clear, logical thinking. So you'll hear me say this at various times throughout the next 12 weeks, that in these sessions, believing what I'm saying does not matter. Some of you, I'll acknowledge, some of you are very religious in your beliefs, and some of you are not. Some of you are less so. Some of you are kind of in between, and I respect all of that. So, and then some people believe in God, for example. Some people don't. Some people may be atheists or agnostics, and still be interested and curious and believe in an afterlife and in reincarnation. So they're not necessarily all connected with each other. You can have any or all of those beliefs and still benefit, first of all, from the series here, but also have an understanding, a deep understanding of the afterlife, regardless of what your religious beliefs are. Sometimes people will talk about spirit, the universe, God, any of the above, and all of that is all fine as far as I'm concerned. When you hear me share my beliefs with you in these series, it's not my intent to persuade you to follow my beliefs. That is not what I'm about. My whole thing is, what are my beliefs based on? My beliefs, and I think this is what I encourage, the way I encourage us to think about our beliefs, is that my beliefs are based on my experience and then my interpretations of those experiences. Interpretations meaning my understanding based on, in my case, my rational, logical, consistent thinking about those experiences. What makes sense, in other words? When I say logical, rational, I mean, what makes sense? What makes sense and what's consistently making sense when I interpret those experiences? So, again, my experiences are basically data points. You'll hear me use that phrase. Those of you who have read my book, you hear me use that phrase a lot. These are data points for you to consider, and what I'm encouraging you to do as a result of these sessions is try to think more consistently and more rationally and logically about the afterlife and reincarnation experiences. It's not an approach that a lot of people take, quite frankly, and it's an approach that's worked really well for me, and I encourage you to explore considering that approach, thinking about them consistently, logically, what makes sense, as opposed to what? As opposed to just blindly believing what somebody says. Because ultimately, in our pursuit of self-development, which we're all involved with, everybody who's curious about afterlife and reincarnation stuff is involved in self-development in a conscious way. And ultimately, what does that distill down to? That distills down to, for me anyway, thinking more clearly about stuff, about life, about any of these topics that we're going to be talking about. To me, that's what wisdom is. We live in a culture that's very content oriented. It's all about learning more content. And content is good, but we need to take that content and filter it. We need to take the content and filter it and see if it makes sense. To me, that's where wisdom derives from, where we take content, we distill it down into what makes bite-sized morsels that make sense to us. We filter it through what our experience of life is, and then we become wiser from that. And that's, to me, where wisdom comes from. So what I'm doing is helping give you a framework in the 6-part series in which to think more consistently and then compare your ideas and other people's ideas with this framework of consistent thinking. Ultimately, of course, those of you who know my work, I'm here to help reduce people's fears and anxiety on planet Earth, whether it be about physical death or about anything else, and helping increase our understanding about all of this. Okay? So let's get started with today's discussion. What happens when we die? So I'm gonna start by giving you 4 general statements, and we'll come back and revisit them, each of them. Okay? First general statement: there's less difference between here and there than we think. I'll come back to that. Number 2, and the there is not far away, it's just unseen by us. Number 3, yes, there's no dense physical body, no biological body after we die. And the 4th point is, yes, the mind continues. All right? The mind and just define terms very quickly. When I use the word mind, you could substitute the word soul, spirit, consciousness, awareness, all the same thing as far as I'm concerned. I work across cultures and religions throughout the world, 41 countries so far. So I try to use words that are not spiritually or religiously or culturally loaded, so that they can make sense to the person right away. So when I say mind, I'm talking about our conscious focusing part of our mind. Those of you who have taken my meditation class, you hear me use the 8-inch plastic bucket analogy. You know, there's this small part of our mind, which is part of our mind, but our mind is vast. So it's a continuum from that 8-inch plastic bucket focusing part of our mind to the vastness of our mind. But that's all of our mind. And so when you hear me use the word mind, any of those terms could be synonymous with the word mind, the way I use it. Okay? So let's go back and talk about this a little bit. And I'll hit on all of these 4 points at various times in our discussion. Okay? The 4 points again. Less difference between this side and the other side. The there is not far away. No dense physical body, biological body, and the mind continues. So let's talk about this, some of these principles here. So first, let's just talk about one underlying principle that in physics, the first law of thermodynamics. What's the first law of thermodynamics tell us? It tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's the idea that conservation of energy. So if I take, this pad of paper, and it's a solid pad of paper. We can touch it, we can hit it, make noise with it, and so forth. But if I burn this pad of paper, what happens? The pad of paper changes form, of course, turns into ashes, and and all that, a pile of burnt paper and ashes, etc. But also, what is it also doing? It's giving off gases and so forth in that process. Well, if we collected all of that matter that is this pad of paper right now takes on a different form. That's the idea of the first law of thermodynamics, that you can't destroy something and make it completely disappear. It can take on a different form. And so the mind, in the same way, is energy. Our mind, or consciousness, or soul, spirit, is energy, and it continues after we die. But what about the body? So our physical body dies. We know that. Our physical body, our biological body. So you'll hear me start to use in these sessions the word biological, because I was thinking about it in the way I've used physical body in my previous sessions, and from a physics standpoint, we could argue. You get a physicist in the room, and they could argue that, well, if you're talking about your energy continuing into the afterlife, or whatever you want to call it, heaven or whatever, different cultures will call it different things, so I just call it afterlife, but you may call it heaven. It's continuing, and our physical body is continuing in an energetic form. They would still consider that physical. So I started introducing this idea that we don't have a biological body on the other side. Just, for those of you who are who want to be very technical about this. So our mind continues. Our energy form continues after we die, and my experience has been that it's identifiable after we die. In other words, what the term that I use is we have an identifiable energy pattern after we die. Why do I say that? I say that because my experience is, when I have experienced beings from the others who are on the other side, who have maybe, some of them have been physically, some of them are dead loved ones of mine, some of them are, are friends, some of them are on the other side and have never been incarnate in physical form on this side. So I just refer to them as personalities or minds on the other side. My experience is I can recognize them. I can recognize who they are. And I know some of you have had visitations and communications from your dead children or other dead loved ones, mothers, grandparents, etc., friends, and so forth. And you can identify that it is them. That's why I refer to this, that we have an identifiable energy pattern, it seems, after we physically die. So that if I'm on the other side and I see Brian on the other side, I'll recognize him. He doesn't have to show me the Brian who I knew in 2020, what he looks like, although he could show me that Brian face that I recognize from 2020. He could show me that in an energy form. So I've experienced that many times as well, where I see an energy form of somebody I knew on planet Earth, and they're on the other side, and they can show me in a light form, an energy form, light, like as in light, like energy light, a light body form, what they looked like. So I'm reminded of, that's Brian. Oh, get it. And then Brian comes visits me again. He doesn't have to show me that anymore, because now I've recognized his energy pattern. And so some of you may have had that experience again with your loved ones who may have visited you from the other side. That's an example of what I'm talking about. It's recognizable, recognizable energy form from the other side. Here's another point. So people wonder, when we die, do we merge into some cosmic soup? Well, you can see what I just, based on what I've just said, you can infer from what I just said already, that's not the case. That we continue, because we can talk to our children and so forth, or our dead grandmother, or in my case, my mother and my father, who have passed away and so forth, are on the other side. We can talk with them, we can communicate with them, or we can have some knowingness, and sometimes they may communicate verbally with us, or telepathically, or through feathers. We'll get into that in more detail in that session when we talk about it. But they can communicate in various forms. But the point is, we know that there's a them, that there's an identifiable them there, and that identifiability means that their individuality is continuing. Therefore, this notion that's out there, when you hear this notion that we merge somehow with God, we merge with the universe. When you die, you merge into some people even use the phrase cosmic oneness, or merge into some soup or something like that. That's incorrect. It does not seem to match with my experience of that reality on the other side, and it doesn't make sense with the experience that many of you have had of experience of your children or grandparents or whoever who've died on the other side, and they're on the other side. It's inconsistent. It's logically inconsistent. So that's an example of cognitive dissonance. You'll hear me use throughout the 6-part series here this phrase, cognitive dissonance. What does that mean? That means when, and it's very important for you to listen for this, when you're out hearing spiritual speakers talk about spiritual experiences and their interpretations of those experiences, because this cognitive dissonance is really not just throughout the spiritual communities, but it's throughout a lot of people's thinking. But we're here talking about spirituality, so I want you to listen for inconsistencies. These are things where it makes no sense from a common sense, logical, rational standpoint. So, for example, the one I just gave you, this is cognitively dissonant when they say, oh yeah, you can talk with your dead loved ones and so forth, and yet in one breath they'll say that, in another breath they'll say, oh, when we die we merge with God, and your loved ones are now merged with God. That makes no logical sense. Or they may say your loved one is merged with spirit or whatever. It does not make logical sense. Now, you could figuratively say this, and I'm okay if that makes people feel comfortable saying that, figuratively speaking. But as I said at the beginning in my introduction, my intention is to help us think more clearly about these things, because then you can, when you think more clearly about things, more rationally and clearly about things, you can unconfuse yourself, if that's a word. I think I just made up a word. You can relieve yourself from confusion by thinking, oh, hold on a second, does that make sense? And then step back and then put it through the does that make sense filter, and is it consistent filter. That's the thing. So and to give you another example, people will say this notion of oneness is a very popular. It's been popularized in the last probably 10 years or something like that, 10, 15 years. This notion of oneness, and that when we die, we merge with the oneness. Again, it's inconsistent with your experience of having communications with people on the other side, because merging with oneness means lack of individuality. By definition, that means you have lost your individuality. You cannot have experience. You can only have experience when you have individuality of consciousness. Consciousness cannot be merged into some big cosmic soup and still have experience. So when somebody's communicating with you from the other side, your loved one, that is an individual mind or individual consciousness. It's an identifiable energy pattern. It is the mind of the person you recognize. These are people I recognize when they communicate with me. Some people I know, some people I don't, but they'll recognize them when they communicate with me again. Those loved ones who you know who've communicated with you are definitely recognizable by you, because their personality is the same. There's something about them that you know it's your son or your daughter or your grandmother or whoever it is, and not somebody else, because there's a reasonableness to the evidence. The evidence meaning the similarity of the personality who's communicating with you. Oh, that seems like that's definitely my son. I just know it is, or my daughter, or whoever. So back to this oneness idea. Where does that come from? It comes from, I think, a very genuine experience that many of you have probably had. I've had this experience thousands of times, and especially during or after my meditations. I've been meditating for 50 years, as you guys know. So, but very early on, and some of you have taken my class, and you know, very early on, you can experience a feeling of connectedness, a connection with oneself, a deep connection with oneself. Not only that, but sometimes you can experience a connection with everyone, with everything, inanimate and inanimate, living and not living, a connection. That's a very genuine experience. But the fact that you are aware of the experience means that you, the experiencer, are retaining your individuality. You're not merging into that experience, because if you merged into the experience, you would have zero experience. Okay? So the fact that you are aware that you have had that experience means that the light was on. You know that phrase, lights on, somebody's home? Lights on, nobody's home? So light was on, somebody's still home. If somebody's still home, you haven't merged with oneness. There is no oneness. You cannot experience this idea of oneness. So it's just a point of confusion, which is understandable, because the experience of connection and deep connection in this way that I just described, almost feeling as if infinite connection is a real, genuine experience. But jumping to the conclusion that you are then merged with that is an incorrect conclusion. It does not make sense. So people have used, and some scientists who claim to be scientists but use non-scientific thinking, have used the quantum mechanics theories, which is a mathematical probability theory, to support this idea of this notion of oneness, being an experienceable piece of reality. But again, that's using a probability theory is not proof of anything in the typical way, in the true sense of the word proof. Proof in theorems, those of you who remember your mathematics, those are proofs. Those are proofs, meaning there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. Other than that, things are open to interpretation. And so really what we then have is we look at the filter of, is it more reliable or less reliable based on the evidence that we have? And so combining that evidence that we have, for example, I know it's my dead daughter or my dead son because the personality is the same. The languaging is the same. They're communicating with me the same way. They're talking about stuff that only they would know and that I know. That's reliable evidence. So combine that with your own rational thinking about it. That makes sense. To me, that's good enough proof, if you want to call that proof. But I discourage you from going down the road where you hear some of the spiritual teachers talking about there's absolute proof, scientific proof of XYZ, because you're going to run into so many people who are scientists who can poke holes in that accurately, and that may make you feel confused and insecure. So I'm trying to reduce that by telling you, don't go down the scientific proof road. It is not a good road to go down. Go down the road of what's your experience. Is your evidence that you have more or less reliable, and does your rational thinking tell you that it makes sense? That's good enough proof for all of us about any of these experiences. Okay? This whole notion that heaven can be proved, etc., it's just a waste of time, quite frankly. Now, if that makes you feel better, that the term, that's okay, but understand it's not provable as in an absolute proof like a theorem is either right or wrong. Okay? Brian, you know this as an engineer, what I'm talking about. Okay? So that's just a little tip for you here. Here's another point about dying and on the other side. What about this whole notion of time and space? You hear people say, when you die, and people will have near-death experiences and so forth. We'll talk about this next session. They'll say, "Wow, I died, and there was no time, and time and space didn't exist." What do they mean by that? First of all, the short answer is time and space does exist on the other side. But what do they mean when they say that? That is another point of cognitive dissonance. It's a conflation. It's a confusion of points. But again, me trying to help you think about these things clearly. Here's the thing. What is time? Time is a measurement of change. That's what time is. If there's individuality, which we've established that there is on the other side, otherwise how could our dead loved ones communicate with us, etc., etc., and how could the people who have NDEs, who may never have had communications with the other side, how could they come back and say, well, Jesus met me on the other side, or Buddha, or my dead grandmother, or this angel, or Archangel Michael, or whoever they say met them in their NDE, and they come back and they have this experience? There's clearly individuality there, and therefore there's change. And if there's change, there's time, because time is merely a measurement of change. Now, here's where the conflation and the confusion comes in. It comes in because people are not used to experiencing vast differences in the experience of time on planet Earth. The experience of time on the other side is very, very different from our experience of time on planet Earth. Yes, but the difference doesn't mean that time doesn't exist. What they really mean to say, if they're really thinking about it accurately and articulating it accurately, they would say, my experience of time on the other side is nothing like what I experience on Earth. That would be accurate. But what you hear people say, and you'll hear spiritual teachers say this, is there's no time on the other side. No, That's because they don't understand what time is. Time is merely a measurement of change. Change still exists on the other side. It's just changing at a very, very different rate than on this side. Therefore, the experience of time is very different. Analogously, what do I mean by this? If this is a little bit confusing to you, here's a real life example. Example on this side. We've all experienced being on vacation. And if you've been on vacation and having a great time, the vacation goes by very, very quickly, doesn't it? It's like, what happened to the week? I got to go back to work now? I got to go back to school now? Now, where did the week go? Time seems to fly by when you're having fun. You know the expression. When you're having fun, just time flies when you're having fun. Okay. Now, if you're sitting in class, like I remember sitting in study hall, 5 minutes to 3 in high school, when the bell rings at 3 o'clock, everybody can go home. 5 minutes to 3, that last 5 minutes seems like it lasts forever. Forever. When's this 5 minutes going to end? It's still 5 minutes. It's still that week on vacation. It's still the 5 minutes before 3 o'clock. Our experience of time is different. Well, you take that and you multiply that by 10,000. Your experience of time on the other side, very, very different from experience here. So people will say inaccurate things like there's no time on the other side. And they'll say that there's no space. What do they mean by that? Well, their experience of time and space is very different on the other side. Because why? Where we are energy, like we said already. We are energy when we die. So I was thinking about this to give an example. And if we think about energy, what can we think about energy that we think about on this side that's a known quantity? Light. We know about light. We can measure light. We can measure the speed of light. Imagine on the other side, after you die, you're no biological physical body. You're in an energy form now on the other side. Let's just say, for example, you could travel at the speed of light. Do you know how fast that is? Everybody knows the speed of light is really fast, but I looked it up. I looked up the speed of light. The speed of light is 670,616,629 miles per hour. That's the speed of light. It's ridiculously fast. Let's just round that off. Call it 700 million miles per hour. 700 million miles per hour. So let's say that you could travel at the speed of light on the other side. I don't know how fast I could travel on the other side. I remember being on the other side. I don't know how fast, but I know you can get around really fast because you could just think and then boom, you're somewhere. It's like, so let's say it's 700 million miles per hour just for the sake of argument, because we're talking an energy form on this side that we can measure. How fast is that? That means around the equator, the fattest part of the Earth, you can get around the Earth traveling at the speed of light in 1/8 of a second. That's how fast. 1/8 of a second around planet Earth. 8 times around the planet Earth in 1 second. It's like ridiculously stupid fast, okay? That's an example of how somebody could genuinely have an experience on the other side, come back and go, yeah, there's no time and space on the other side. Well, the experience of time and space very different from planet Earth, because you can just go and there you are. And so you feel like you can be anywhere at any particular moment in time, which is almost true because 700 million miles per hour is really fast. Or let's say, if you want to get nitpicky with me, you maybe say, well, how do you know it's 700 million? I don't know, but maybe you can travel half the speed of light. I don't know. Maybe you can only travel you can only travel half the speed of light. You can only go 350 million miles per hour. Whatever. The point is that we are energy on the other side. And in the experience of being able to just think and be somewhere and think and make something happen, that's also leads to somebody to say, well, there's no time and space on the other side because I can just think and I can be on the beach and I can think and I'm climbing a mountain, whatever. Because that seems to be the experience on the other side. from my experience and from in talking to other people who remember being on the other side as well. But again, just get rid of this. If you hear people say, "Oh, there's no time on the other side. There's no time and space on the other side," it's a red flag. I'm not saying to discount everything that they say, but just listen very carefully, because that's somebody who has not thought carefully about what time is, what space is. Time is a measurement of change, and there is still change on the other side. It's just very, 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 very different. Okay? What about this idea of tunnels of light? And if you have questions about any of this stuff, like I said, bring it up in the Q&A, and we'll talk. We can dive deeper into any of these topics. What about this experience of tunnels of light? You hear this a lot. People say, "Well, you go through a tunnel of light when you die, and this is what happens," and so forth. Here's the bottom line with any dying experience that anybody may have. There is no one way that it is. That's pretty much the only absolute thing you can say. It's all relative. It's all up to that individual's mind, their choices, their belief system. A lot of that filtration is going on in their mind automatically when they die, and their experience of death will be accordingly. And so sometimes people experience a tunnel of light, sometimes people don't. And partially this tunnel of light notion also, I think, is a result of a certain lack of familiarity with the lightness and energy of our own minds. So let me explain to you what I mean by that. So first of all, yes, you can experience a tunnel of light sometimes. And I know other people who have not experienced a tunnel of light, and they're on the other side and so forth. But what do I mean by this last comment about the familiarity of our own minds? So those of you who've taken my meditation class, you've heard me talk about getting out of that 8-inch plastic bucket, and I briefly alluded to that earlier in this talk just now. Out of the 8-inch plastic bucket. We allow our mind to get familiar with this 100 million room castle that is our mind. I'm making up a number, but and I'm giving, it's not really a structure, but just to give you an order of magnitude. Most people are familiar with 3 or 4 or 5, 6 rooms in this mind that has 100 million or 100 trillion rooms in it. Our mind is vast. It's huge, is the point, okay? But if you're only familiar with a few rooms in the mind, and you all of a sudden go to the other side and you have a near-death experience, this is usually where these tunnels of light stories come from and so forth. People come back and tell us, or maybe they communicated from the other side through a psychic. But if you just immediately go there after having only been living your whole lifetime on planet Earth in 3 or 4 or 5, 6 rooms, you are in where? You are in a field of light. That's energy. You are living, you are in a universe, or in a world, we'll call it, because we are in the universe also. But you're then in a different world. You're not on planet Earth. You're in a world of light, and you're not familiar with it. Now, those of you who meditate know that you start to familiarize yourself very naturally more with your own mind. And by getting more comfortable with your own mind, you start to experience your mind in a very easy, natural way, less fear, less anxiety, and so forth. And you may at some point start to experience your mind as light, lit up, in other words, from the inside. That becomes more and more your normal experience as you continue meditating over the years and decades, so that when you die, it's not a big deal. So I'll talk to you about, in the next session, about my near-death experience. But my near-death experience where I almost died was not a big deal for me, because I'd already been meditating for 2 years. It's like, okay, field of light, big deal, But if you don't have that experience, the tunnel of light can sometimes be interpreted as, wow, I went through and then all of a sudden it's just this light, and you go through a tunnel and then it's light, because as you're going through, getting closer and closer to the other side, in a sense, as your mind, your consciousness, your spirit is getting closer and closer to the other side, it feels as if it's a tunnel, because you're leaving this darker side, darker not meaning bad, but darker meaning not as lit up for most people, to a more lit up side. So thus I think the notion of tunnel experience is derived from that. But the more consciously aware you are of the lightness and the lit upness of your mind, the less tunnel is my my interpretation. Okay. What about being greeted by old friends and loved ones on the other side when you die? To this point, the theme of today's discussion, remember, what happens when we die? I think that happens a lot, and that happens typically to everybody. I don't think anybody dies alone. You know, to this COVID-19 thing, you know, which is going around, as we know, terribly worldwide, a lot of people are having to physically die alone in their hospital room because the families and the loved ones are not allowed to be present. Well, what I'm suggesting is there are many, many people present at their death. And they're just on the other side and they're unseen. And those of you who have had experience with dying loved ones in this lifetime, in hospital or at home and so forth, and you've been with them when they are dying at end of life, have experienced this and heard them talking about, oh, there's Bill who, there's Uncle Bill, or there's Grandpa, or whoever who's died a long time ago. There's my grandmother, she died 20 years ago, and here she is in the room with us, because they are there to greet us. Now, what are they doing? My experience is that they are there to greet us and help us acclimate because it is different. So when I said at the beginning, there's less difference between this side and the other side, I don't mean from a physical standpoint there's definitely difference. And from a light standpoint, there's definitely difference. And they help us acclimate to that. But also the acclimation, this is another part of the acclimation that needs to happen, is the idea that there's less difference. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we take our minds with us. We don't all of a sudden become all-knowing when we die. Do we feel differently on the other side? Absolutely yes, because we don't have a physical biological body that's hampering us, that maybe was sick, or maybe it was in pain, and maybe it was full of cortisol and who knows what, and it was causing us a lot of distress on this side. We don't have that. But do we take our mind and our emotions with us to the other side? Yes. And so we have friends and loved ones on the other side to help us acclimate to the fact that we are still alive. Our mind consciousness is still alive. And they also are there to help support and give us kind of loving emotional support for the fact that we are still alive, and to take away the shock factor which many people may have when they physically die. So we are welcomed by many loved ones on the other side, and friends and so forth. Here's another point for those of you who have had family members who have died and wondered where they are and how come they can't visit you more often. Maybe they've visited you some. Maybe some of you have had dead loved ones who have not yet visited you as well. And so my point here is that, number one, time and space are experienced very differently on the other side, like we've already talked about. And so even if they've told you before they died that they will get in touch with you if they can from the other side as soon as they can, their experience of as soon as they can on the other side is different from our experience of time on this side. And I have an experience with a friend of mine, and her brother communicated with her 16 years after he died, and he left her a suicide note saying that he was going to communicate with her immediately as soon as he could from the other side. And he finally communicated with her 16 years later. In his mind, it wasn't that long, though. And he communicated through me to her. So, so again, I say this to try to help relieve some anxiety among some of the, some of you out there who may be wondering, where's my dead loved one, whether it's my child or my parent or my friend or whoever, and how come they haven't communicated with me because they said they were gonna? Their experience of time is very different. Another point on that is that they're not just sitting around on on clouds playing harps like in the cartoons I used to watch in the 1960s. Remember those merry Looney Tunes and merry melodies? And those of you old enough to remember, I watched those like for hours. And always, if somebody died, boom, their soul is sitting on a cloud playing a harp. No, we die and we're doing stuff on the other side. There's all kinds of things to do on the other side. Primarily, it's R&R. Do you know what that is? Rest and relaxation. That's primarily what we're doing on the other side. It's vacation mode. Mentality on the other side. So you don't have to go to work, you don't have to eat, you don't have a biological body to feed and to worry about staying healthy and all that stuff. We're mental. We are mental energy life forms on the other side. Still identifiable, individual, etc., but free, if you will, from the confines and the responsibilities, putting a roof over our head and all that stuff that we have to worry about when we have a biological body. So yes, it's definitely much more relaxing and so forth and all that. But you could be off climbing a mountain. Like one of my friends' brother came to him in a lucid dream and told him he was off climbing a mountain with friends. And my friend told him in the dream, this was about 30 years ago, he had this experience, my friend, when he was about 20 years old, and his brother drove off, 17 years old, drove off, and they never saw him again. He got in a car accident. He never saw him alive again. Got a car accident, and his mom was distraught, as you can well imagine. His mom was just a wreck. And she sees her son in the morning. I get a little emotional telling you this story. It's in this story. The longer version is in my book, but the short version is, 17 years old, drives off. Mom never sees him again, alive. And he comes to my friend in the dream, and my friend said to him in the dream, he said, "Go tell mom, because mom's a wreck. Go visit mom and tell her you're okay." And my friend John did not tell his mom about the dream. And then 2 days later, his mom called him up, my friend John, called John up and said, "Your brother came to me last night in a dream, and he told me he's been off climbing mountains with friends. He's been off climbing mountains with friends, and he's fine." And so it just relieved her so much. But it's a great example of, we're not just sitting on clouds playing harps. It's like people are doing stuff, et cetera, and the experience of time is very, very different on the other side. Okay. One other point about the friends on the other side is that my experience is that we are greeted not only by our friends and loved ones from this lifetime, but from many other lifetimes. And we will remember who they are when we see them. And it may be thousands of people greeting you. So you imagine leaving this lifetime of having dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of friends in this lifetime, and then going to the other side and being greeted by that number of friends times however many lifetimes greeting you on the other side. So happy to see you again, kind of a thing. And how many parties you're going to be going to for how long. Okay, so there's that element too, just to kind of give you keep things in perspective here. And as I've alluded to already, just to end the session, with this point. Who creates these different scenarios? We do. We're creating them. It's not. There's not some panel of judges on the other side saying, "Okay, you're going to go here and you're going to go there, and you're going to go to this world and you're going to go to that world." No, we have control over our minds. We are free will thinking minds, and if we don't have a body to worry about, we even have more freedom on the other side. All right. And so, here's another thing. People talk about levels on the other side. Are there levels on the other side? There's no structural levels. Now, in the same way that there are no structural levels on planet Earth. Now, if somebody came to planet Earth, a visitor who'd never been to planet Earth, they might leave planet Earth saying, "Man, there's all these levels on planet Earth. There's like, there's these, just look at it from a socioeconomic standpoint on planet Earth. You got all these levels. You got the poor people, you got the working class, you got the middle class, you got the upper middle class, and you got the upper middle class, and you got the wealthy, and then you got the super wealthy." There's like, how many levels are there? 8 levels on planet Earth. There's 8 levels on planet Earth. That gets starting to get spread around the universe, and everybody thinks, yeah, Earth is all about money, and it's all about these levels. And you got these 8 levels on planet Earth, and here's what they are. And when you go there, depending on blah, 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 you get put into that level. Now, do those levels exist on planet Earth? Yes. Who created them? We did. And not only that, but I have never been super wealthy or wealthy, and I have been in all of those levels. I have visited the super wealthy. I have visited the wealthy. In other words, you can go in all these. There's nothing that keeps you out of any of these levels on planet Earth that an alien might say, absolutely, those are the eight economic levels on planet Earth that everybody is in. It's all about those levels. Same thing on the other side. People will go to the other side and they'll come back, or a psychic, or somebody will say something through a psychic, and it'll come to somebody, and it'll be channeled to somebody on this side, and they'll say, yeah, there's these 6 levels, these 8 levels, these 12 levels, depending on who you talk to. There's different numbers of levels on the other side. And there's this level, and you go here and you learn this, and you go here and you learn this, and you go here and you do this. Is everybody in school on the other side? No. Is everybody on school on this side? No. How many people do you think, you look around yourself honestly and candidly on planet Earth, how many people do you think have strategically thought out that they want to be here to learn all kinds of life lessons? I'd say it's a very small percentage of the human population of the 7.6 billion people, really. Really. Because the free willness of our minds is always operating. Most people are here just to have fun and just to figure out this and that, and I want to see what this is like. Oh, what's this like? Oh, what jumping off a cliff is like? Oh, what's bungee jumping like? Oh, I've never done that. They didn't have that 500 years ago when, last time I jumped off a bridge, I died. Now I can jump off a bridge and I can experience what it's like to live jumping off a bridge. Is it like that on the other side? Absolutely. People can go here and there and learn stuff or not learn stuff, and they can go to different levels if they want to, but is there structural levels on the other side? No. So there's not this thou shalt. You gotta go to this level. Because of this, you get put into this level. That's what I want to debunk. That's what I want to take off the table. Because it's all about right here. It's about those of you who are on the phone. It's about right here. In your mind. In your mind. That's what's controlling everything on the other side. If you are with somebody you don't want to be with on the other side, you can travel at 300 million or 700 million miles per hour or whatever and get the heck out of Dodge and be someplace else really fast. All right? So I want to increase your idea of freedom and reduce your fear and anxieties about the other side. Because that's what's going to increase the relaxation, the vacation modeness of the other side, which is what it can be about, and which is what I encourage you to do when you get to the other side. Is just to chill out, have fun, and choose to come back or not if you want to. It's totally up to you. All right? It's a time to rejuvenate ourselves. That's the thing. That's what I want to leave you with in terms of the discussion today about what happens after we physically die. Okay? So, let's open it up for questions. Anything at all. Take your phones, take your mics off mute. Ask away. Anything is fair game.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes, Karen, yeah.
If we can come back and what's the point of all of this? Like, why do we come back?
Why do we come back?
Why wouldn't we want to be on vacation all the time and be able to buzz around and be with only people we love and buzz away from people we don't instead of having to deal with them? Why do we keep coming back? Why do we choose that?
Yeah. Why do we keep coming back? Why do we choose to come back? Why not just be on vacation and be with people we love and be able to buzz away from people we don't want to be around? Exactly. So that's the $1 million question that you need to ask yourself when you're on the other side deciding to come back. Because nobody makes you come back. We each choose to come back. Now, I can conjecture. I can't speak to your choice, Karen, and so forth. That's why I say it's between you and you to kind of ask yourself if that's the $1 million question. I jokingly say that. But, seriously, that was your choice. Why do we choose to come back? There are many, many reasons why we may choose to come back. We could choose to come back to be with certain friends who are back here on this side for certain reasons. Maybe they're here to create a family, for example. Maybe they've chosen to come and create a family on this side with certain ones of their loved ones who have never been part of what we'll call a nuclear family, a biological family, in other words, on this side. Maybe they've just been friends. Maybe they've had other relationships in other lifetimes. Maybe they've been friends. Maybe they've been grandparents and grandchildren and so forth, and they want to experiment and see what's it like to be married, husband and wife together. Who knows? Just because the connection was such. Or maybe the grandfather comes back as a close friend of somebody because the grandfather connected with a grandson so closely that they developed such a bond in a previous life that the grandfather comes back as the best friend of this lifetime of that previous grandson. In other words, there's all these different reasons that that some of these relationships may get rekindled in different forms. That's one reason. Another reason people could come back is to do certain projects together, and I'm going to get into this. That's one of the reasons I've come back this lifetime and in previous lifetimes to do various projects that I've been involved with 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, etc. So I'll get into that in the third session and maybe the fifth session. But so you may have actually a specific plan, in other words, that's more, I don't know if professional is the right word, but yeah, could be professional also. You may want to start a business with certain people. There's all kinds of reasons to come back. And another reason, I'll just tell you, I have this one client and she really loves ice cream. Does anybody on the call like ice cream? I don't know. I bet there's a few people. But anyway, I have one client, and we talk about the afterlife, and I say, Tasha, you love ice cream. There may be, there may be people who are just not that strategic in terms of their thinking about stuff, and I want to get together with this family or that family or do this project or do this business project or whatever. They may just be missing the ice cream because they don't have a biological body to feel and taste what it's like to have ice cream. Can you have ice cream on the other side? Yeah. Does it feel and taste the same? No, because you don't have a biological body. They may be just like I said, Tasha, they may be thinking, I really miss that soft serve ice cream, and boom, they're down the chute into a body again. It's like, who knows? So it could be that random for some people. It's just, how strategic are you as a thinker? And that's how strategic you're going to be on the other side. How many people do you know in life who are really strategic thinkers and plan things out? Not that many people. Most people kind of, they bounce around, they're opportunistic and so forth, and they have a certain feeling about something and they go with it. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that's the norm. And so that would be the norm on the other side too. And another reason, Karen, could be boredom. It could be boredom. It could be, I'm not saying this for you, I'm just hypothesizing with you right now, right? It could be like, okay, I'm on vacation. I've been on vacation for 500 Earth years now. I can eat whatever I want to eat, be where I want to be, see wherever I want to see. You know what? I was going to go back to Earth and try it out again and see if I can make some stuff happen that I couldn't make happen last time. So it's like a challenge to some people, right? It's like a challenge versus, being on vacation for 500 years. I've been on the other side for hundreds of years sometimes for various reasons. So, I mean, there's nobody saying, okay, Karen, you got to go to Earth now. You got lessons to learn. I call it the school marm. There's a whole bunch of angels who are very school marmish. You know the phrase school marm? It's like your first grade teacher who was 65 years old. When you were in first grade, it's like, Karen, do not color outside the lines. Put your crayons down. Now put them back in the box. Put the box down. Now put the box back in there. That whole thing. There's a whole bunch of angels who are like that. And I'm not saying all of them are like that, but there's a bunch of them, and I've communicated with some of them. It's kind of hysterical. And it's like, and it's like this school is in Earth. I mean, Earth is a school, and you got to go down there and learn, because when you get up here, you got to learn your lessons, because otherwise we're going to put you in this level over here, and you're going to go over to that level if you're really a good child on Earth, a good Earth child. When you die and you come up here, I mean child, figuratively speaking, when you die as an adult and you're being a good Earth child and you've learned your lessons, we're going to put you in this higher level. There's a whole bunch of angels promoting that through psychics. And thus you get all this kind of level based on punishment and rewards and all this stuff. It's a bunch of baloney. It's not my experience. It's so much more easygoing on the other side. At least it can be. You can choose to be in the school marm school on the other side. You could choose to do that if you want to, because you have choice. But you also could, if you get sold by the timeshare person who meets you on the other side, who's in the group, who fights his or her way to the front of the crowd of your friends and sells you a timeshare to one of those schools, then you can get out of there really fast. That's the cool thing, because you just go, change my mind. Well, you get your money back. It's like you're out of there. But those are some reasons, Karen. I don't know. Does that help?
Kelvin, can I ask you about something?
Yeah. Does that? Hold on, Sally. Does that help, Karen? Do you have a follow-up or anything?
Perfect description. Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, Sally, go ahead.
Thank you. It's been fascinating, and I can't believe how well this timing has worked for me. Just to remind you, we've spoken, and you know that I communicate with my son. I've seen him. I can feel the vibration of spirit when it's present, not just my son, but other people. So today, it's the first anniversary of my son's passing, coming up next week. Car accident a mile away.
Wow.
So I went to fresh flowers there this morning because friends of his will be going there on the day and so on. And I get there and there's the sprinkler system going. So I have a few minutes to kill, and so I'm standing back from it, reflecting, I'm looking at the spot where he actually passed. I knew where his body had lay, and thinking of all the mediums that I've spoken to this last year and how different all their accounts have been of what's happened. It's just been, and not only have their accounts been different, but, some it was all pre-planned, others it was accidents.
Right.
And I'm standing thinking about it all as I look there, and because he doesn't speak to me about his accidents. He speaks to me about his happiness and so on, but not about that. And then I turned to where the tree had been that he'd hit, which no longer there. They had to take it away.
Yeah.
Redamaged. And I was thinking, that's where he drew his last breath, the impact of the tree. I went to take a photo, and my phone has been manipulated before by spirit and by my son. So I get hold of my phone, it's in my hand, to take a photo of that spot, and it came up with this: "Sorry, it's okay, Sally, really." You see that?
That's great.
Well, first of all, that's not my son. He would call me Mum.
Yeah.
And I know it's not a relative, because I feel that. Now, so who's talking to me? And I felt very strong. I felt very strongly connected, the spiritual, the vibrations and so on.
Yeah.
So who is telling me, "Sorry, it's okay, Sally"? Really? Who is there then, do you think?
Yeah. What do you think?
I'm assuming it was my spirit guides.
Yeah.
Or whoever God, source, or whatever is.
Yeah. Hard. It's probably, yeah. So if it's not recognizable language from your son, who would not call you Sally, right? It's probably, yeah, you're probably right. Some spirit guides, who knows? We don't really. I get a lot of communication when we talk about this in the 5th session. I'll get into much greater detail, but since you're bringing it up, let's talk about it a little bit. I get a lot of communications. I don't know exactly who they are. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I know exactly who they are. Other times I don't. And so it's just like, I just call it my posse. It's like my group. It's like I have different posses, and you could call them spirit guides or whatever, but they're friends. They're friends of mine, friends and loved ones who just kind of, who hang out. We hang out together, and they're not that far. Like I said earlier, we cannot see them. But they're right here, they're just operating at a different frequency, so to speak, different vibrational level, etc.
Actually, I'll show you some. That was at the top of the screen, that message.
Yeah.
And below it was this, and it changed color and shape. It lasted for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the screen went back to its normal mode of my normal screen.
Yep.
But that, I could only take photos of it, because if I videoed it, I would have lost it.
Yeah.
So I just took screenshots, beautiful, stunning colors and it lasted for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The message, and then it disappeared.
Yeah. See, that's a great example of what I was talking about earlier in the beginning of the discussion today, which is we have this evidence. Now that's a piece of evidence. It's what in legal we would call, it's evidence. But rationally, when we think about it, where else could it have come from? Well, is it a glitch in the phone? Maybe it's a glitch in the phone. Probably not. It's just something, because if you take it to Apple, they say, we would never seen that before. They've never had a phone show that, which would give you more evidence that it probably is not a glitch in the phone. And so it's rationally, it seems to make sense, for example, in that example, that there's somebody's communicating with you from the other side, right? It's like, how else do you explain it? And so who it is, we don't really know, but it seems pretty clear to me what's more important is the message that you got, right?
Yeah.
Right? Which it really doesn't, it's like, what matters is your experience with your son, that he's talking about this, that he's fine. That's all we really care about. If our loved one predeceases us, that's all we care about. All the details of whether it was pre-planned or an accident and this and that, it's really, who cares, right? Now, I understand that some people may go down that road because it gives them some comfort. But ultimately, the true comfort comes from knowing that our loved one is okay. That's ultimately what we care about, right? And then let me just make a comment, Sally, and you can come back and say more if you want. But let me just make a comment about this pre-planned versus accident thing that you get from different psychics. This is very common. So there, first of all, let me just, I'll talk more about this topic again in our 5th session when we talk about communicating with the other side. But there are psychics and there are psychics. There are psychics and there's a gradation of psychics. There are really, really good psychics who can tune in very, very well. And then there are some psychics who are just charlatans, quite frankly. They're fakes. And then there are people in between who can tune in sometimes well and sometimes not as well, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? The bottom line is that it's always up to us to filter. I did psychic work a little bit in the 1980s, in the mid-80s, when I opened up to this. I stopped doing it because I really choose instead to empower people through teaching people in this way through my classes. So that's a choice that I make to not do that work. Because anyway, but the point is that in terms of this pre-planned and accident thing, if you really understand, whether you're a psychic or not, forget about being a psychic, it's irrelevant. If you really understand things more clearly, the way I'm trying to encourage all of you to think about things, you can still have a plan before birth and still have an accident also. They're not mutually exclusive. That's the point. So it's not an either or. That's a mistake right there. Because if free will is operating all the time, then that means that there is no predetermination, absolute destiny. If you want to use destiny in a very, very loose way, that, oh yeah, we had a plan, and oh, we got together, da 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 da. Great, fine. But it's never absolute. Why? Because the free will aspect of every mind in the universe is always operating, and there's an influence on everybody else. That means you and your son in this case, Sally. So even if you knew on some level before he was born that he might die, it's always a might. It's never an absolute, because things happen and intervene. You may have had a plan, Sally, I don't know, but let's just hypothetically say, Sally, you and your son may have had a plan to live to old age together, for you to die at 90 something and for him to die when he was in his 60s and 70s, okay? You may have had that plan before birth, and then it got derailed because of other people's free will choices. And when we get to it later in the series, I'll talk about Jesus. And that was an accident. All right? Sally, anything else?
Yes, okay.
Yeah? Yeah. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Yeah. I got a question here. Let me see. Kelvin, do you have memories of yourself being in the afterlife between lives? Yes, I do. So, yeah, I do. I have memories of being in between. I have memories sometimes being in a mental form for hundreds of years, or what seems to be hundreds of years. I don't know exactly. But, hundreds of Earth years for a long, 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 long time. And I also have memories. I've experiences being on the other side at times. I'm sometimes on the other side at night in my dreams, and in the run up to the 30th November event that I'll talk about in another session later with you, I had a lot of meetings on the other side with some of the folks who were helping organize that event. So at night I have meetings. It would be like I go to bed, I close my eyes, and I'd be working all night, and I'd wake up feeling like I just worked all night and felt like I got the deepest sleep that I've ever gotten. It was pretty wild. What's the main reason people are afraid to die? What's the main reason people are afraid to die? I think the main reason, it distills down to one word, and that's uncertainty. I think that's it in a nutshell. I mean, people may describe their reasons for fearing of dying in various ways, but I think it's really distills down to the uncertainty and not knowing exactly what's going to happen and how, then. And so I give people these data points to try to relieve that to some extent. But uncertainty, because it's not, I tell people, I help people get rid of the uncertainty. I mean, of the fear, not the uncertainty. I can't get rid of uncertainty. Uncertainty exists in the universe. It's part of our free will universe. But I can help you get rid of the fear associated with the uncertainty. That's the key. So when I help people get rid of their fear of death, it gets rid of their fear of uncertainty, and then they live more in the present. That's the goal of all my work. Those of you who've worked with me before know this. Let's see. I've heard and read about people in NDEs or in life between lives who experience a life review. Good question. Thank you. Life review. So, what about this idea of a life review? For those of you who don't know what that means, a life review is kind of like the name implies. You die and you get a review of the life that you just had on planet Earth. And so it's kind of like a photo album, or like scrolling through your photos in your smartphone is like flip, but like really fast, and you can kind of get a quick view of your whole life really fast. Like I said, time and space is experienced differently on the other side. So really fast in Earth time, you get this, and you can get a sense for how did you make people feel and so forth, and what were consequences, et cetera, et cetera. What were some of the consequences of your actions, et cetera, through your life, et cetera. So can that be a learning experience for some people? Yes. For other people, it's just a pleasurable experience. So it's not like a punishment thing. So this is an example of where people will conflate that, and they'll say, yeah, see this punishment, blah. No, that's somebody's interpretation of the experience. But it can happen. Does it always happen? Do you always get a life review when you die? No. Some people, not everybody gets a life review when you die. I mean, it's if you want a life review. It's like, do you want tea or do you want water? Do you want lemon in your water? It's kind of like that, Some people are like, yeah, no, I gotta skip the life review. That's fine. I'm good. Like, what's that? Oh, there's my friends over there. Life review. I'll do that. Can I do it later? Yeah, I can do it anytime. Okay, great. There's my friends. Oh, no, you're hugging your friends on the other side. It's like that, So, but yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you raised that, because this is like another example of there's no absolutes. So people will say, when you hear people say, oh, when you die, you get a life review. Sort of, yes, no. I mean, any people start talking absolutes with you, red flag, okay? Because it's your choice. Let's see. Why do some people have negative near-death experiences where they may feel like it's a hell experience? Great question. Okay. So somebody was asking about negative experiences, near-death experiences. And it's great that you raised it, because I will raise it again next time when we talk about near-death experiences, and I'll get into this in more detail, but it can happen. And just in a nutshell, so I can get to some of the other questions, as some people have their mics lit up here. The reason that happens is because they are dying with a certain level of fear that they're filtering their near-death experience through, okay? And it's being filtered through that fear. So what do I do in my work? Right now, I am helping people reduce their fears, because then when they die, they will have fewer fears. They'll have less fear, and they'll have a more enjoyable dying experience, deathing experience, whatever you want to call it. People have used those different words. That's the thing. So I'm helping people now reduce their fears, live their lives more fully present in the moment on planet Earth with a physical, biological body and all our loved ones, and die more fear-free and have a more fear-free existence on the other side. That's what I'm doing in my work. So is it possible? Yes. And they can feel like it's a hellish experience. But it's no different than on this side. Can people feel like they're living a hellish experience on planet Earth? Yes. There are many people who are experiencing that. And I guarantee you, with this COVID-19 pandemic that's been going around the world, that number of people who are experiencing life on planet Earth as a hellish experience has increased. Questions? Other questions? Somebody else had their mic on earlier, but whatever. Yeah? Any other questions? These are great questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you, Kelvin?
Yes.
Talking about the levels, could the levels be the development of spiritual or maybe consciousness, level of consciousness?
Well, people can experience openings in their awareness. So I used to talk about levels of consciousness in the 1970s, yeah. But I stopped doing that, I don't know when. In the 1980s, I stopped talking about levels because levels implies you kind of get to a level and then you kind of plateau out or something. I think of consciousness as fluid. It's fluid, and can we expand our conscious capacity for experience? Absolutely yes. Can we restrict our conscious capacity for experience? Absolutely yes. But I view it as more of a fluid thing. So the levels on the other side, who knows? I mean, there are people who are very level oriented. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like grade 1, grade 2, like levels like that. And like I said, I seriously meant it when I talked about the schoolmarm thinking. It is very widespread, very hierarchical. There's a large group of angels on the other side who are connecting with psychics on this side, who are promoting this whole notion of very, very strong hierarchical order on the other side. And I'm suggesting that you don't have to buy into that if you don't want to. You can, and that's your choice. But so I don't know if that helps, Anne, but the levels of thing, because I think of consciousness more as an expanding thing, an unfolding thing, and it's not linear even, because I think about my own consciousness and how it's developed and how my past life memories, we'll talk about that, how non-linear it's been, and at times when I opened up to the other side, how wonky it was at first, and so forth and so on, and I'll give reasons why I think that was the case for me, etc. Wonky meaning not smooth at times, and so forth, I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't necessarily experience it as like grade levels. There's sort of like, I don't know, it's sort of nebulous, I want to say nebulous rooms out there. In this world, in the physical world, in the spirit realm within the physical world, as well as in the, I guess what some people would refer to as an afterlife, the afterlife world. But I keep thinking of just humanity as a whole and how humanity has evolved. Gosh, I mean, here we're quite intelligent creatures, but, thousands of years ago we were not, so there's a lot of similarities, in the physical world and the spirit realm. Yes, time is different. No, we don't have a physical body in the spirit world, but there is my experience anyway has always been an evolvement from overtime, so I would assume, and just again from my experience, that also within the spirit realm, the evolvement, but not in a straight upward, kind of like in a cycle, sort of.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. I would say that, first of all, let me just say 100,000 foot. Anybody can experience levels or whatever you want to call them on the other side if you choose to. So that's always a choice that people can make. What I'm saying is that structurally it doesn't exist. So that's why I use the example of socioeconomic levels on planet Earth, so that people can choose to look at things that way. Absolutely. And they will there are many people who believe that is, that they almost believe that it is structural. But I say it's not structural, it's a choice. It's something that's fluid and so forth, etc. The other thing I would say about evolution of human consciousness, I think there has been some evolution, but I think that the level of, there's two things that I distill down to that are huge bumps in the road that I question how much progress we've made as a race, a human race, on if we didn't have social rules limiting us, is cruelty and the importance of being important, and those two principles. And those are whole other sessions and so forth. And I may touch on this a little bit in some of the other Afterlife sessions. I may not, but I don't know. We'll see. But the cruelty thing, how cruel how have we become less cruel? I think somewhat, but I think there's a huge amount of work to be done there still, and the importance of being important, meaning this whole notion that that levels almost promotes an idea of being more important. That my view of consciousness, for example, I don't look at consciousness in terms of levels of consciousness, because if I'm candid with myself, I can't fully assess myself. I'm still knowing myself. I look at self-development and self-realization as an eternal journey. For me, this is the way I look at it, as an eternal journey of self-knowing, knowing thyself, self-realization for eternity. And that means that there's never a plateau at which I know myself fully, because there's always going to be something that I could know more about myself. And that's true for myself, and I think that's definitely true for my knowledge of the universe as well. But just looking at it from a self-development standpoint, if you just talk about state of consciousness, I cannot assess my own state of consciousness, so how can any other mind or set of minds assess other minds fully enough to assess them as this level or that level, and okay, there's this level and there's that level, and so forth. So I think this whole notion of being a schoolmarmish kind of thinking is actually fitting, because it implies that those angels are able to assess people's minds, and that they have fully assessed, they have assessed their minds more than others, and I just don't like that, because it's a slippery slope. It becomes a judgy thing, and I much prefer people look at choices that we make as free will operating minds, and that knowledge of self is a continuum that continues forever. That's the way I look at it anyway. I don't know if that helps. There's no right answer to this. That's the thing. Okay? That's what I'm saying. You can choose to look at any of this stuff in terms of levels. It's a choice. Sandra, did you have a question? You got to unmute. There you go. I have some other questions on the chat box I'll get to in a second, just so you guys know. Go ahead. Go, Sandra.
Kelvin, when my mom was dying,
yeah, we only got the beginning of that, when your mom was dying.
me,
Go ahead. Try it again. Sounds like the Wi-Fi's going in and out.
all right, when my mom was dying,
Yeah. Yeah, you just your mic is muted now, Sandra. You want to click it again, Sandra? While I answer, why don't you play with your mic there, and then let me answer some of these others in the chat box here. Let's see. Can a mind on the other side see and hear living people on Earth clearly? Yes. The short answer is yes. If they choose to. So here's the other part of the equation here. People got to understand that minds on the other side, typically, yes, they can hear us on this side. You can just read your mind and so forth, and it's energy, right? That said, if they have an excessive amount of fear on the other side, that will block their ability to communicate with you on this side also. So it's not just your inability to communicate with them or hear them. It could also be the other way around, because remember, what did I say? We take our minds with us, and if we have fears that we're taking with us, that's going to block our experience communicating from that side to this side. Okay? Let's see. How do you interpret the consciousness, observer, watcher that is watching our body minds, and what happens to that observer after the body dies? So, Rachel, that's me. That's my mind, if that's what you're talking about. My mind is my mind. And when I talk about my 8-inch plastic bucket part of my mind, that's my focusing conscious part of my mind. That part of my mind I take with me, and all the time. And when my mind expands outside the 8-inch plastic bucket, the bucket's going along with me. You know what I mean? In other words, my conscious part of my mind, or what you're calling the observer or watcher, is so forth, is always experiencing, and that's what we take with us. It's our mind. It's not a separate part of our mind. A mind. That's why I say our mind is a continuum. It's fluid. It's all connected. It is my mind. I don't like this idea. You may have heard this term in spiritual communities. Sometimes they'll talk about this idea of witnessing. I don't like that word. I understand where it comes from. I think it's a misplaced concept because it implies the lack of fluidity of the mind. We can have our mind experiencing itself, but that is not a separation. That is, to me, an integrated experience. So this is a little bit abstract, but our mind is our mind. We take our mind with us. Our mind is experiencing continually here and after we die. I'm going to give you, in the second session, I'll give you an experience that I had on the other side where I almost died, sort of, kind of also. Not my drowning near-death experience, but another experience. What happens to a person who dies by suicide? Do they have to come back promptly and finish out their lifetime? No. The thing is, people die by suicide. It's a horrific choice. It's a horrific life situation that causes them to make that choice. They are in psycho-emotional trauma, and so there's no punishment that goes along with this. There's no life lesson that they need to come back and learn, etc., etc., etc. Only if they choose to. That's the thing. There's nobody outside our minds saying, you got to go back, now you got to go back, and you got to go back and learn a lesson, da, da, da. Okay, you can stay here, you can stay here. There's none of that, okay? There's only choices that we are making as individual free will thinking minds. And so if somebody chooses to kill themselves by suicide, that must mean that they were in tremendous psycho-emotional trauma. That's what I mean when I say a horrific experience. They must have been so tremendously psycho-emotionally traumatized for them to kill themselves, okay? Well, they can stay on the other side. In fact, arguably you could say even longer on the other side, not just shorter on the other side like this person's implying, because they need to chill out and relax and R&R and get more vacation mode that we talked about earlier, so that they can, if they want to come back, they can come back. They don't have, we can hang out on the other side as long as you want. But if they want to come back, then they come back more psycho-emotionally integrated and centered. Okay? Look, I don't often say the following to public groups. This group I can say it to. But my meditation students don't generally notice this, so some of you will go, what? And some of my meditation students in this class will go, what? In my meditation classes, sometimes there are 100 to 200 beings on the other side in my meditation classes. So when there's 10 or 20 of you in my meditation class on this side, I've seen 100 to 200 taking my meditation class on the other side during the group meditations. When I'm meditating with you, this has happened to me 2 or 3 times now. I've gotten a window into the other side, like something opens up and I see a crack in the door almost. And so my point is that, who knows? It could be some of those who killed themselves by suicide, and they're taking my meditation class on the other side. All right? To help their minds. It's obviously not affecting their physical, biological body. They don't have one. But their minds, helping their minds get more centered and so forth. Good question, though. I'm glad you asked that question. Joanne, that was good. So another question, why do we not remember our past lives? Well, there are many, many reasons, and I'm going to save the longer answer for this in the third session when we talk about reincarnation and past lives. But the short answer is, we don't have to remember our past lives in order to develop. But most people don't remember past lives generally due to having been closed down. Their mind closes down because something unpleasant happened then, and it shuts them down to many or all of their past lives. I'll talk more about that in the third session. Sandra, here we go. Let's see. When my mom was dying, she saw birds flying around her. I'm aware that dying patients can experience many things, but in your experience, does seeing birds have any significance? I don't, personally, I don't know. I don't have, I've been with a lot of people dying, and a lot of people have told me they've seen a lot of things, and sometimes I can see what they're seeing too. Not always, but I know. My short answer is no. I don't have any comment about that in terms of any greater or lesser significance. The main thing is, it probably had significance to your mom, and that's the main thing, right? For some reason, your mom saw the birds flying around, and hopefully it made her feel more comforted, etc. You know? When my grandfather was passing, he told our family that he had a one-way ticket on an airplane and he had to go. He's just saying, what he was saying there, your grandfather, is that he was ready to leave planet Earth, and he was ready to go to the other side for a long time. That's essentially what he was saying. He was using it figuratively speaking. It's not a one-way ticket. I mean, you can come back, and he can choose to come back if he wanted to, but he can choose to be over on the other side, like I said, also for as long as he wants. So he doesn't have to come back at any particular time, but he was just using that figuratively speaking. I've read that they are called psychopomps and signify spirits coming to help them cross over. Have you heard of those? I've not heard those terms, but they're just labels that somebody may have given for various beings who may help people cross over. Because it's for most people, crossing over and physically dying is such a unique, it's literally a once in a lifetime experience. No pun intended, I guess. It's a once in a lifetime experience, and it's such a unique experience for them. Whereas, as compared to what? As compared to meditating regularly, you regularly meditate twice a day, you are essentially dying all the time regularly. What do I mean by that? You are experiencing yourself outside the 8-inch plastic bucket. regularly. You're not literally dying. I mean figuratively speaking. And so because the way we're describing the dying experience is not a physical thing. Yes, it's a physical thing from a biological body standpoint. Yes, okay, we got that. But what we're talking about is dying is a mental experience, and we don't die. Our mind continues. That aspect of the, if you want to call it dying process, where our mind continues and gets way outside the 8-inch plastic bucket, although we take the 8-inch plastic bucket part of our mind with us, as we said earlier. That is what I mean when I figuratively say when we meditate, we're dying all the time because. Not all the time, but we're regularly experiencing ourself outside of the confines, the boundaries of the way it's normally experienced. That's what I mean by that. Can you address when people say we are living multiple lives at the same time in different dimensions? Yeah. Sometimes people will say that we're living multiple lives in different dimensions. That is not my experience of time. That's why I say time and space still continues on the other side. But I think that conflation and the interpretation of an experience of the incredibly unusual nature of time and space on the other side can lead to conclusions like that, where people think that they're living lifetimes in other places and so forth. Because you can go to the other side from this side in waking, dreaming, or sleeping state, right? You can go to the other side quickly, anytime you want to. I mean, look at psychics. That's what psychics do all the time, right? So it's possible. And so if you do have that ability, then let's just say you are one of those people. Maybe not you, but let's say somebody does have that experience, and they travel, and they're traveling at the speed of light on the other side to different places in the universe. And then they think they're in the two different places at the same time because they're comparing it to planet Earth travel versus 700 million miles per hour travel on the other side. And thus they come back and then they say, oh yeah, you could be on two different places at the same time. Well, it seemed that way because you could be seemingly in the same place at the same time, but it's just, I mean, if you can travel 700 million miles per hour, that's 1/8 of a second. You're in a different place. You're 24,000 miles in 1/8 of a second. So if you're going not 24,000 miles, then it's a fraction of 1/8 of a second. So then it can get conflated into, you can be at two different places at the same time, multiple lives. Now, another source for that could also be a legitimate source of confusion, saying multiple lives at the same time, is you have all kinds of reincarnation memories going on during your dreaming or in another state where it's difficult for you to assess what's what. And so you may be having memories. It's more clear, in other words, in waking state to assess that, okay, I'm Kelvin Chin. Oh, I'm not this other person now. But in dream state, it's less. It's more difficult to make that differentiation. So that's another source of possible confusion for that, being multiple lives at the same time, because there are certain principles that we'll talk about that I think are universal principles in the universe that those ideas violate, quite frankly. Let's see. Do we take our gifts and skills to different lives, such as an artist? So what we take with us is our personality. We'll get into this in much greater detail in our 6th session. But is part of our personality being an artist? It could be. And so the short answer is, very commonly, that aspect that you're asking about is, does travel from lifetime to lifetime. Yeah. But you could also choose, because you can make choices, to not to express your artistic nature in that lifetime. So you may have it within you, you may not express it, you see. Okay? And so others may look at you and not know that you have an artistic side, for example, okay? Most people don't know that I used to play tenor saxophone, for example, because I haven't played tenor sax in decades. But I used to be a pretty good tenor sax player, you know? So they don't think of me as a tenor sax player now, you know? Other questions? That's everything in the chat box. You want to take your any more live questions before we call it a session? Okay.
I have one.
Yes.
In all the things that I've read and heard or whatever, everybody always says that when I pass, that I will see my son.
Yeah.
But what if he chooses to reincarnate before me? That would be something he could do. So then I would not be seeing him.
It's all probabilities, Heather. So it's all probabilities. You're right. He could choose. He could choose to reincarnate before you die. And I'm sure this has happened in the past where children have predeceased parents have said, I want to go see my mom and dad again. Okay, and they work out some arrangement on the other side with somebody, and they say, hey, I'm going to go down. I'm going to join your family. Let's go down and get that family. And you're in that family, and they want to connect with you again in this lifetime, and they're going to come up and knock on your door and say, I'm blah 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 blah, and show you, give you some evidence that they are your former son, and because of the free will choices that everybody makes in the universe, it doesn't happen. So that can happen, for all kinds of reasons. But short answer is yes, and you may not see him. It's all probabilities, Heather. You might see him. He could choose to come back and do this hypothetical that I just made up, and it may work or it might not work, depending on what the probabilities are and the free will choices that everybody who's involved are making. Okay? And then there are people who are indirectly involved. It's not just the people directly involved. It's all these millions, thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of other minds that are indirectly affecting that. Okay? Like I said earlier, I alluded briefly to Jesus' crucifixion as an example. And I'll get into that more detail in a subsequent session. Okay? Yeah, does that help, Heather?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. You're welcome. Any other questions? Anything else? If you have anything else pops up to mind, and people who are watching the recording, send me an email. Your questions, I'll do my best to answer, and then we can also pick up. Each of these sessions it's like a cumulative thing, right? So you can ask more questions about this session in the next session, and so forth, so on, because they're all. I broke them up into these six different titles and categories of topics, but it's all one category, really. Okay, so I hope that's been helpful. Great Q&A, really good questions. Thank you for being so interactive, and also thank you for being those who were on live. Thank you for getting on time and early. So it was really great to have. We had 25 people on 15 minutes before the call, so it was great. So we could start pretty close to on time. So we'll see you in 2 weeks from today, same time. We're going to talk about glimpses of the other side more explicitly. Talk about near-death experiences, spiritually transformative experiences, which really is just a catch-all for everything else. That means near NDEs and everything else, STEs, and then out-of-body experiences and so forth as a precursor to those other experiences. And I'll tell you about a couple of near-death experiences that I had. One in particular. Let's see. One other question. Let's see. When people just die, do their minds see what's happening during their funeral? Oh, yeah. When the people are recently dead, do they see what's happening at their funeral? Definitely. Yeah, they definitely do. They're hanging around. They're hanging around for the likelihood that they're just off climbing a mountain immediately is not very great. That likelihood is not very high. They're hanging around the funeral. My dad was hanging around at his funeral service in Hawaii that we had for sure. We knew he was there. He let us know he was there, and I'll tell you some stories about that when we get to that. But yeah, definitely. Sai, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're very welcome. Okay, everybody, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And the recording, you should get the recording, like I said, sometime later this evening, depending on how long the upload takes to go to YouTube. Okay? I'll send that to your emails. Take care. We'll see you.
Thank you, Kevin.
You're welcome.